Welcome to Distracted, the podcast with Angela Lockwood, the place where you will find practical brain-boosting strategies, expert insights, and real-life stories to help busy brains thrive in the age of distraction. Let's go. Welcome to Distracted. I'm Angela Lockwood, and today I hope that you are listening in a way that you are extremely calm. Now, you could be out walking, walking your dog. You could be listening with your headphones, maybe while you're cleaning or doing something. But what I want you to do today is to try to find space to listen to this episode, because today I'm joined by Angie Saunders. Now, I love this because she's Angie and I'm Angela, so it's already a little bit of a kindred spirit here. But Angie is the founder of Breathe Me and the O2 Collective, and I will link everything to these programs with all these show notes. But one of the reasons I invited Angie to come and speak with you today is she's an expert in the power of the breath. Now, it's something that I often talk about, whether it be with kids or with adults, but Angie literally lives and breathes. Now, that even sounds crazy, but breathing. She lives and breathes breathing. So today I've invited Angie to come on and share with you ways that you can integrate your breath work into your busy life, but also how you can teach kids in your life without it being a really cringy sort of lesson in breathing. So if you are really busy at the moment listening to this, please just try to switch focus a little bit to listen to this content, because what we're going to talk about today literally can shift your well-being, and it literally can shift how you can focus throughout your day. So Angie, I welcome you to Distracted. I can't wait to jump into this.
Thank you, Angela. It'll be good.
Yeah. So, it's really interesting because even me interviewing you and having a conversation with you about breathing, it seems like something that is so natural. Why is it so important now that we need to teach people how to breathe?
Well, here's the interesting thing. If you have a look at your hierarchy of needs, breathing is pretty high up there. Like you can maybe only hold your breath for a few minutes. With water, maybe you can go, a couple days, maybe it depends on your scenario, a couple weeks. Food, you can go a few weeks. But breathing is the most important thing. It's life. So as soon as you stop breathing, you're not living. So we like to look, because it's such a strong life force energy, it becomes unconsciously connected to our behaviors. So if you begin to start paying attention, like an example of when you're stressed out, how do you breathe when you're stressed out? So quite often, a lot of us will either not breathe at all, like breath holding, or they might do nervous or stressed out breathing where they're, controlling in and out, or, that sort of a thing. And what happens is it has to do with the chemistry in the body. When you breathe in a stressed out way, what you're doing is you're blowing off too much CO2. Now, most people think that CO2 is like a toxin or something that's not good for your body, but it is so important, because having the right amounts of CO2 is what allows the oxygen to get from the bloodstream into the organs, into the tissues, and into where it needs to go. So say, for instance, if you're stressed out all the time, breathing really heavy, lowering your CO2, oxygen will not go to your brain. You won't think very clearly. You'll feel foggy all the time. Then the next step might be you get tension in the shoulders or in the body, and then pain comes after that, and then struggle sleeping and become fatigued. So it kind of like starts with little things that bother the body, and then it starts bothering the mind, and then it starts bothering well-being. So what we want to do is start paying attention to it and making small shifts that make a big difference in our mind-body well-being.
That just made total sense, Angie.
Good.
You're like, oh, great, thank you. But that just made total sense, because I know one thing that I notice in my own behavior is if I'm working very much in content, so I'm really on the computer and I'm thinking and I'm typing and I'm really in that deep work grind, I actually stop breathing. I notice how much I hold my breath. And I've heard a lot about email apnea,
Oh,
that,
yeah.
when we're in that. Can you I guess give us a little bit of an insight. Why do we do that? And why do we hold our breath when we're doing that sort of
Mm.
focused work?
Well, I would probably bring attention to what's happening before the breath holding. So usually your body will unconsciously regulate itself. So sometimes we get in the way of the process, and that's where the problem comes. So if you're breath holding or catching your body breath holding, it's because it's trying to balance the CO2. It's trying to raise it up so you don't get into dangerously low levels. That's when people usually pass out or that sort of a thing. So your body will make sure that you have enough automatically. So if you catch yourself not breathing, I would be like, how are you breathing before you weren't breathing? It was probably either stressed out, maybe heavily in and out through the mouth, or maybe small, teeny, tiny breaths that are not getting fresh layers of oxygen down to the lower part of the lungs, where most of the alveoli lies, which is where true respiration happens. So it just depends. Like there's a mechanical aspect to it, there's a behavioral aspect to it. So, I always check in, like if I notice I'm breath holding, I go, oh, what's my body doing? Usually my whole body's tensed up because I'm thinking. And it's like a cat, right before it pounces, they get real like small. They don't do much. That's what we do when we're focusing and concentrating. But long sessions of this will cause a deficit in the body. And so that's why the body kicks in and might start force yawning you or force you to take size or, might be, it's different for everyone.
That's interesting because I notice straight after I notice that I'm holding my breath, I have to take a really big, deep breath. It's like my body's gone, hey, you've forgotten about me. I know you're doing good work here, but what about me? What happens to our body when you talk about that sort of carbon dioxide and oxygen relationship? What happens to our body when we do hold our breath? You sort of
Yeah.
mentioned that it evens out, but what do we find when that's out of balance?
Well, breath holding is good, actually. And we should do more of it because breath holding raises the CO2. And when you have higher levels of CO2, the oxygen can go into the brain and the organs and the stomach and the tissues, and the body just operates better. And the body knows this. So, we really we want to embrace this whole, breath holding thing, thank the body for doing its job. So we want to do that. It's the behavior before that's causing that to kick in that you want to have a look at, because if you're going into deficit and the body's having to kick in, maybe you can go into some self-regulation techniques before it gets to that point. But also if it's not a problem, then there's nothing really to look at because the body's naturally doing what it should. And that is where we want to get to anyway.
I haven't passed out doing content yet. So I haven't passed out writing any articles. So it must
Your
be
breath won't
doing
let you do that. It just won't.
next time I pass out, I'll just go, oh my gosh, I remember what Angie was talking about.
That's when you're controlling too much. That's like extreme.
So you also sort of, I guess we're talking about breath holding, but what about that high breathing you mentioned earlier? So, I work a lot with people who are living their life in overwhelm, or they're feeling very overwhelmed in moments and they don't know how to shift that overwhelm. What I often see is raised shoulders,
Mm,
closing of shoulders coming forward or tightness, and their breathing's really shallow, fast. What's that all about?
control. It's when you feel out of control, you feel like you want to control everything. So the first thing that we go to is controlling our breathing. And the shoulders curving over, if you think about it, it's a protection. It's going into the fetal position. It's going into, protecting the heart, protecting the chest. So it's a natural physiological survival instinct. Which is great, if you had real threats. But being that we don't have real threats these days, they're mental threats or perceived threats that it's for us to work through. So what we generally recommend if you catch yourself doing that is to let go of control and let the body go and self-regulate itself. And we have a technique called reflexive breathing that we bring attention to, where usually you'll notice in those instances there's a control in the inhale, control in the exhale, and minimal, if any, no holding. So if you think of it like this, our natural physiological breath with no intervention should be in the shape of a triangle. So if you can imagine a triangle, you inhale up one side, you exhale down the other, and then there's a short pause, very slight short pause. This is the natural breathing rhythm or shape that we should be focusing on. So usually when you're stressed and overwhelmed, you're in more like a small circle breath, and you're controlling inhale, exhale, thinking, mind racing, getting ready for fight, flight, or freeze. So if you switch your breathing from that stressed breathing to a more reflexive one, which means you relax the muscles around the breathing mechanism. So that's the mechanics, which means you'll probably have to, relax the rest of the physiology, let the shoulders go, let the belly go. Take a sigh if you need to get yourself there. Let go of control. And then picturing the triangle, and inhale, no forced exhale, and allowance of a pause. Sometimes when you're in that mode, it's really hard to allow for a pause. So what we do is we get to like a bounce first, where you're like, inhale, exhale, allow for a little bouncy pause. Inhale, exhale, bouncy pause. And the more you can relax in that pause, the more relaxed you can get, the more the blood begins to flow proper, the more you can think clearer, the more your body will relax, the more you can make decisions from a very different point of view than if you were doing it in the stressed out circle breathing kind of way. Does that make sense?
That is so helpful, even just being able to visualize that triangle, and I just felt myself relaxing listening to you. I felt like my shoulders dropped a little bit. I even felt my tummy grumble a little bit too.
Yes, rest and digest. This
And
is rest on the fly.
I love this. I feel like this is just like the best therapy session ever, Angie.
Good. Yes, more
Let's
of
just
that.
say I'm speaking on behalf of the audience. Let's say that. One of the things I love on your website, which one of your websites is breatheme.com, you actually have a visual of this that I saw where you have a triangle, a box, and
Mhm.
also the circle. And what I loved is watching that is it gives that real visual element to your breath, because what I see a lot when people are stressed is they're all so much in their head that they're trying to work through it logically, but they just can't. They need to almost have a detachment from it. And I love how I would imagine those visuals really help people.
Yes, yeah. It gives the mind something to chew on
Mm,
when you can start working with the body. Because sometimes the mind just can't let go, allowing you the space to do the work that you need to do.
mm. Now, that sort of brings me to I want to talk about when it comes to kids, so breathing with kids. One of the things that I often see in my workshops is parents will ask questions about how do I help my kids emotionally regulate when they're either in a real tantrum phase or they're in that real elevated state of, I guess just feeling out of control themselves for the kids. And I often see people go, calm down, just calm down and talk to me, calm down and talk to me. And the kid just elevates more, right? It just becomes this thing out of control. Why is it in those moments when we are very heightened, it's so hard to calm when you're in those moments?
Because we're empathetic beings. So when somebody else or our children are having tantrums, it affects us. And we almost feel like we're having a tantrum ourselves. We don't like it. It feels icky. Don't do that. Don't do that. And, interestingly enough, this, like when you were sharing this is very familiar for me because a couple of years ago, it would have been about 5 years ago, when it kind of like we had tantrums that started with one of our children, and sometimes she would wake up in the middle of night and have tantrums for a couple of hours. She would have tantrums that would go all day long. We had 56 late days one year going to school, and it was real struggle for me because I'm like, here I am, this breathing expert, and I can't help my child, right? So what I found was that I had to be the example for her. I found that when I reacted to her and tried to make my energy higher than her to tell her not to do it, her energy would raise up with mine and we'd be butting heads. So, what I had to do was just to connect with my breath and do whatever breathing I needed to do or whatever breathing my body needed to do to express my frustration and emotions, and then be there for her to help her with hers. So, I'd say number one, it's to be the example. It's to learn how to manage yourself first and really go to town on being the expert at managing it yourself first. Because then you can be, if we're very, being that we're empathetic creatures, the young one will see the older one is in very well grounded control of themselves. It makes them so easier to feel safe enough to let go and not tantrum anymore. Like usually it's an emotional reaction. So that was key number one that I got to. Then there were games that we used to play together. And of course, this is age related, right? So the younger ones, it kind of works really well with them. I feel fortunate enough to have been able to work with our kids young enough to where they know what they need to do. So they have choice in the matter when it comes to it now that they're older. In which my older one now wants to help other teens. So that's kind of cool too, So the younger ones playing games like what's really interesting is, the vagus nerve, of course, right? We would play what we call the shushy game. And we would be like, okay, who can go the longest, right? And we would go in through the nose because it activates parasympathetic. So, shh. So quite often, even when the tantrums were really, really big, that's all I would do. I'd just be like, shh. And it was really more to calm myself down than it was to calm her down, right? But it works. So we call that the shushy. And then there was one time we're in the car and we were all really angry at each other. And we had this agreement when somebody called the game, we had to play it. And the game was who could hum the longest. So we'd go, who can hum the longest? And we go, and we would just hum it out as long as we could. And then it stimulates play and it kind of shifts the energy from being angry at each other to going, oh, this is kind of silly, and it was a state change and it pulled us out of it, so that was one part of it. And of course, there's all kinds of other games like breathing through a straw and trying to blow a ball across the table or in a circle or something, there's loads of different types of breathing games that you can play with kids. So it's more like make it fun, kind of gamify it a little bit, who could do it the longest. And that seems to work really well.
I just love that because too often, can you imagine sitting with a child? I know this through my work when I was practicing as an occupational therapist. I was working with kids, and it was so boring if you were to sit opposite a child and tell them to breathe in through their nose, out through their mouth by just looking at them. Like it is so ineffective, and the kids are so bored. They're like, "What in the world are you trying to teach me?" But when you start to make it fun, like you say, the straw with the ball across, playing soccer, teaching them that your breath is such a powerful tool. And I just love that you're giving those suggestions even from an early age, because gosh, if we can teach emotional regulation and also physical regulation to kids, then there's strategies that kids can build for life.
Yeah.
You did mention something there that I just want to jump in because our listeners may not be familiar. What is the vagus nerve and what's its impact when it comes to a relationship to our breath?
Yeah. Well, it's what sends signals all over to the body, right? So say it's a survival mechanism. So if there's a stimulation or a trigger, it will create a reaction. So a reflex, right? In occupational therapy, you'd probably be familiar with the reflexes. So it carries the message. So say, for instance, if somebody says something to you, there's a physiological reflex to it, right? That is the signals that are being sent through the vagus nerve. So if the vagus nerve is highly stressed out all the time, then it's going to create fatigue in the body because the cortisol levels are just like zapping all of your energy all the time, right? So what we want to do is we want to create calm body, calm system, sharp mind, quick thinking, rather than the survival, trigger, react. So what we want to do is we want to interrupt the reaction time. So there's a trigger, and then you feel the reaction because you can't stop that. But then what you choose to do with the reaction is where the magic happens. So usually what we do is in a conversation, if we're angry, we quite often, in family arguments, if we were angry, instead of like reacting or throwing words back, as parents, we would quite often just do a sigh of relief first before we said anything, and we realized that just doing that sigh was enough time for us to not yell and choose to parent instead, which was so key. And then doing that over time created a new habit. So instead of habitually reacting, we were habitually responding. And that was the key element that also allowed us to maintain our energy levels to parent, because we weren't so stressed out and fatigued at the end of the day by reacting to everything.
Oh, wow. Uh, I know that so many, even if you're not a parent listening to this, even I would imagine relationships. So if you have a partner and you're in an argument with a partner, I love that. Having a sigh of relief. I just love that term because um, too often when we respond, we're not even logically thinking properly
Mm,
either. So our body is going into this fight mode and everything shuts down. So whatever happens after that usually isn't our best work.
correct.
It's usually not our best response,
Correct.
right? And then we're going to put all that energy and effort into unraveling the mess
Yeah.
it's created.
Yes. Yes.
Um, you mentioned earlier, I loved that concept also of your breath being about changing of state. So going from one of the things I notice, I watch a lot of sport. I love sport. And what I often notice in football, say, as an example, is before they're about to go for that kick, you see the athlete just have this massive, big, deep breath. And it's almost like I feel I'm sort of picturing in their head, not being a footballer myself, but everything just quietens. I would imagine, the screaming fans and, everybody just screaming. It's like they use their breath to change the state. Is that what's happening for them? Or what happens in those moments when you see that big, deep breath taken?
Well, it sounds like what's coming up for me when you say that is flow state. So it helps them to get out of their mind, because they'd be worrying, oh, if I don't get this, then that, blah, 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 blah. And then that's where the chatter comes in. So the chatter quite often gets in the way of doing what you're really good at, which you unconsciously know how to kick a ball because you've done it a million times. But when you think about kicking the ball, it sometimes you don't get it quite right. So to me, that's a strategy where they can take their breath in, reset, let everything go, let their mindset go, let the judgments or critical thinking go, and just be in that present moment and trust that they know what to do and that they will do it.
Hmm. I feel like our breath almost is the very first thing we should work on. Just
Mm.
listening to you speak, but also through my work, is I see, we try to look at all the 200 ways to find calm in our lives, or the 50 ways, or the top three, or the top five. They all seem like very logical things to add to our plate, and we've got to change that habit, and we've got to do that. And what it happens is we get into this spiral of needing to do more. But what I'm sort of picking up here is that actually, if we take a step back from all of that, that's all good. But if your breath is out of sync or your breath isn't being connected, then the rest of it's just adding more stuff into our lives. Is that?
Yeah,
Mm.
that you said it very well. And so it's very similar to my own personal journey. I did like about 20 years of personal development work by the time I got to the point where I was like, I know how to feel better and I'm not feeling better. What is the problem here? I'm doing all the things that I've been taught to do, from NLP to mindset to visualizations to exercise and meditation, which I hated at that time. So it was like I felt like I just couldn't get to joy and happiness because I was just stressed out all the time. Well, if you're doing all the things that bring in the calm, but you're breathing in a stressed out way, you're going to be stressed out anyway. It's an energetic feeling that you have. And the science part of it is, when you're stressed out breathing and you've depleted your CO2, oxygen's not going to the brain, and it starts to send red alerts to the brain. And then the mind starts stressing out because it's receiving all of these messages from the central nervous system going, something's not right. And then you're going around going, something's not right, I don't know what's wrong. And then you go outside yourself to fix it, and it never fixes it because it's internal. So when you can make that change with your breathing and balance out the body chemistry, you're balancing from the inside out. And that's where it's most magical.
So, for people that are listening right now, you can see why right at the beginning I said to try to find some calm time to really listen to this conversation, because it's not about adding more to your plate. Finding calm, I even wrote my first book, Switch Off, or second book, Switch Off: How to Find Calm in a Noisy World. And what I'm finding, that was back in 2017, right? And I'm finding that people aren't learning strategies because they're trying to do too many strategies.
Yes.
Yeah, they're
Yes.
trying to do too much. So, and I love that story, Angie, because I totally get that it can get to a point in your life where personal development is important, but the most important part of it is actually learning the thing that works most for you.
Mhm.
And I knew we would probably talk way too long, because I have so many more questions, and I love what you're speaking about. Really resonate. I know listeners would be listening to this going, "Okay, I get it." Um, there is something that I know. It's a very odd behavior, and I'm going to say it's something that I do as well. Um, my yawn. So I go to reformer Pilates, right? So, as you know, for listeners, laying on the bed with your legs and arms strapped into things, usually at the end of the day. And what I find is all the way throughout that conversation, I'm yawning. Throughout that class, I yawn. And I see it often too that people try to stifle yawns. So they go to yawn, but they try to be really polite. I put their hand over their mouth and not yawn. What is that all about?
Empathy. They say psychopaths don't know how to yawn because
Oh, great.
because when you yawn, it activates the empathetic centers in the brain, and that's why other people around you yawn, right? But there's also this like ingrained habit as kids that, that it was rude to yawn. People think you're bored or boring, and no one wants to offend the other person. So you want to cover it up so you don't offend anyone around you. So they're all normal, thought processes to do that. For me, I'm just like, I'm flycatcher here, I'll yawn and I'll make it big and proud and, love it, because I know that that's my body balancing itself out, or creating a balance in the system, in the body chemistry. Also, if you yawn a lot, the interesting thing is when you go into, say, a reformer's Pilates session, you're probably going into a little bit of a parasympathetic. You're lying down, right? When you lie down, then the body can relax, and that's when it starts yawning. Yawning a lot is a sign that you're already what we call hypocapnic, which is stress breathing. So the yawning lots is like, okay, well, there's a habit on the lead up to it that you're probably stress breathing more than you need to, and it's probably throwing your body chemistry off of balance. So it's a good sort of feedback mechanism, and the body is so smart. It's great when you can take these physiological signals from our body going, okay, I'm tired or I'm exhausted. Well, yes, because you haven't found that balance yet. And this is what I love about breathing, or breathing work, or breath work. What I love about it is we are already doing it. So we don't have to add anything else in. We just have to bring awareness to what we're already doing and make some small, subtle shifts to make it that much better and more effective for the body chemistry and for the physiology, and therefore our mental states.
So throughout this conversation, you've touched on quite a few, I guess, symptoms or signs that if people are feeling out of balance, or that they're feeling that their breath is not working with them, or they're working against their breath. What are just a couple of, even just do really quickly, a couple of the things that people could, if they're noticing this in their body, they might need to take that step forward and get in control of their breath?
Well, the first step really is to let go of any control of the breathing mechanism. So it is allowing the breath to become reflexive. It is in one moment, just stop, take a sigh. You can even blow all the air out, all the stale old air that's been recycling in the lungs. Take another sigh, let it go, and then just let the breath bounce however it wants to. Because when you let the breath bounce however it wants to without constriction around muscle contraction, it allows the breath to just normally balance itself out without you having to do anything. So really, it's about letting go of control. That's probably the first thing that I go to. The second thing I go to, believe it or not, hydration. Sometimes when the body is dehydrated, it goes into stress mode and starts stress breathing as well. So we hydrate. So that's the first thing I do when I feel stressed. It's like, okay, relax the breath, balance out the body chemistry, hydrate, make sure the physiology is looked after. And sometimes if the body's not doing well, the breath will also let you know it's not doing well. So it's about that, really connecting with your body and what it needs, and how you can help it to be optimal in everyday life.
Angie, I just have absolutely loved this conversation. There is so much value that our listeners, I'm sure, have got out of that. And I will obviously link to your website. So you have your community, which is the O2 community, which is really cool name. O2 obviously being oxygen for listeners, but O2 Collective about being a community around supporting people through this. But also you've got breatheme.com, which is more your coaching site. Now, so I'll link all of that. Can I just ask before we finish up, if people are feeling that something has resonated with them throughout this conversation, because I know that this is really powerful, living in stress, living in reactivity, living in that fright, flight, or freeze mode has become, unfortunately, a real norm for us. What is the one thing people could do right now to help shift that?
It would be the reflexive breathing. Get really good at it. Sometimes if it's, one of the things we do say is we teach the shapes like what you had mentioned before. Even, we've had people that print out that infographic and put it on their fridge to help remind them, and it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you do something different. So if you choose to breathe in a triangle or breathe in a circle or breathe in a square, a lot of people do box breathing right before they perform because they've got the pre-performance jitters. So it's like it's about self-discovery into what works for you. The reflexive breathing is the one technique and the only technique that works for everyone. And I've been looking for the last 10 years. What's the one technique? And reflexive breathing is the one technique that you can use. But if you need to bring personal interventions into it, you can use a little, triangle breathing, circle breathing, square breathing, and we do have tutorials on that.
Excellent. Angie, thank you so much for your time. There were so many moments that I felt like I pressed pause throughout that on my breathing. So thanks so much. I could only
Good.
imagine through your programs how much support you give people. So thanks so much for coming on Distracted.
You're welcome. And thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me.
All right. So everyone, that was Angie Saunders from Breathe Me and the O2 Collective. So I just want to say that the fact that you have got to this point in the episode means that there was content we covered today that really resonated with you. And if it did, I encourage you to go back and have a listen and just take out one thing that you can do to implement some of the strategies that Angie shared with us throughout this episode. Or if you feel like there's somebody in your life who would benefit from listening to this, then please share it with them because we know how simple breathing is, but we know sometimes how hard it can be to implement it into our lives. So thank you so much for being a part of Distracted and for listening to this episode with me and Angie Saunders. And I wish you all the very best in finding calm in your life. And thanks so much for your time here on Distracted.